I'm Natasha Leger. I'm Executive Director, Interim for Citizens for a Healthy Community. Thank you. We are a 500-plus strong grassroots nonprofit organization here in Paonia, dedicated to protecting our air, water, and food sheds from the impacts of oil and gas development in our watersheds, around our homes and farms and schools. We are an education and advocacy group. We are dedicated to public lands primarily because you can't industrialize oil and gas development in the North Fork Valley without public lands and minerals. So our education and advocacy efforts are to empower you, our community, for those of you who are not aware of us, but you, our community, to participate in the public process around decisions on public lands and protecting our community, our health, our air, and our water. So we partnered with Elsewhere on the Inspired Art at Work project because art is really such an important component and role in helping us all understand our world around us. It is a window into the soul. It is a mirror on society. It reminds us of the things that we have forgotten, and perhaps most importantly, it causes us to think differently about the things that many people would like us to believe. And so this project, we believe, was just so incredibly important, not only because it was about socially and environmentally inspired art, but because it was about engaging the entire community into a dialogue. And there are so many ways that we can think about how that dialogue transpired over the last several months. But I like to think a lot about the potluck dinner on Friday because I just think that was so incredible. For those of you that attended when you got there, just the smells from the different dishes that arrived and just being curious about what those would be. And then watching everybody take from each dish and create really their own palette and their own canvas, and watching each plate represent something different and a piece of art. When I saw one with a marigold flower on it and with everything else on it, I just thought to myself, we're all individual artists. We are all artists ourselves. And we always need the opportunity to pause and think about how we can see the world differently, and especially as our landscape and our communities are changing. And I would like to say that art is so incredibly important at this moment in time because things are moving so fast, so rapidly, even in small town Colorado, even here in Paonia. I mean, how many of you can honestly say to yourselves that you believe that it's August 27th? I mean, how did that happen? And so everything is moving fast, and we need the opportunity to just pause and just take a look at things a little differently and take in other people's perspectives on things. And so I believe we're also in a transition around the world and here locally, in transition in terms of climate and in terms of industries. And we need the opportunity to think creatively and innovatively about how to become resilient and adapt to all of those changes. Art is one way that we can do that. The other way is coming together. There's so much talent in this community and around the world. We have the capacity to transition to a world that's based on resilience, an economy that's resilient, sustainable, and renewable. We have that capacity. What we need is the will to be able to do that. And so with that, I would like to introduce Marissa Mommaerts, who has worked with CHC for the last several years as well, last year, on some projects, but she's Director of Programs for Transitions, and she's going to talk about how to build resilient economies and communities. She's also been with the Post-Carbon Institute and the Aspen Institute, and she has spent last decade plus working on sustainability issues. And just having worked with her personally, I just want to say that her personal commitment and dedication and passion to sustainability and resiliency is in itself an inspiration. And so I'd like to welcome Marissa to the stage.
All right. Oh, good. It's working. Sounds like you all can hear me. Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, I really want to thank Natasha for the wonderful intro, but also the work she's doing in the community. She works really hard. And also want to give Deirdre and Karen a big thank you for all the work that they've been doing. I'm really honored to be part of this event, and I feel like it's some tough acts to follow, but I'll give it a shot. So my work is in community resilience and regenerative economy. I think that these are concepts that should resonate across the political spectrum. But to start, I want to just reclaim the word community, because in trying to see if these concepts resonate across the political spectrum, we've learned that the word community can actually be a trigger for some people because it reminds them of communism. So I want to be clear that that's not what we're talking about here. Community is a group of people living in the same place or having a characteristic in common. And so for us, we share a sense of connection to place. I think we have a pretty strong sense of place here, which is something really special and rare. I would say we also have a shared culture of kind of self-sufficiency and DIY-ness, as well as what I've experienced since moving here is a strong sense of neighborliness. And I think those are all things that make our shared culture pretty special. So resilience is the ability to quickly recover from or adapt to or bounce back from adversity, which could be natural disaster and economic instability. And when we're talking about community resilience, those are some of the types of adversity we might be looking at. Okay, I want to break down economy. Who can give me a definition of economy, or what does that bring to mind when you hear the word economy?
Debt, money.
Okay.
Business, knowledge, products and services.
Cool. Great. That is what comes to mind. Wow, thank you. It actually means management of available resources, and it comes from the Greek word for management of home. So when we are talking about home, that could be our household, that could be our bioregion, like the North Fork Valley, the Western Slopes, or it could be planet Earth when we're talking about a globalized economy. So who thinks our economy is doing a good job of managing the resources of our home? Anyone? Any hands? I agree with you. It's doing a really bad job of managing the resources of our home, and especially when we're thinking about future generations. So our economy is based on the premise of infinite growth, which means every year we need to grow our GDP, we need to consume more. Can anyone tell me what the problem is with that economic model?
It's happening within a finite planet.
Exactly. Yeah, we live in a material world, and our world only has so much capacity to absorb pollution. Our planet's vital life systems are, its atmosphere, its oceans, its watersheds, its forests are not only in danger, but they're being destroyed. This is a quote from David Attenborough, who's a BBC naturalist narrator. Anyone who thinks you can have infinite growth on a planet with finite resources is either a madman or an economist. No offense to any economist. I have a little bit of background in economics. So, this quote from E.F. Schumacher, he was a German economist, and there's a lot of good work coming in his legacy now. The whole New Economy movement is something I'd really recommend looking into. The New Economy Coalition was kind of catalyzed in the legacy of E.F. Schumacher. But this is kind of what it looks like, coming to our limits to growth. I don't know, can you all feel us bumping into our limits to growth as a planet with finite resources? Yeah. I think we can. If we tune into our environment, we can feel that. And these concepts are overwhelming. I think they can be paralyzing, and so I just wanted to talk for a minute about what this means like in our daily lives to be experiencing these things. For me, I have a 1-year-old son, so it means, he might grow up in a world without whales or polar bears or monarch butterflies, but he might also have to experience some of the horrors that come with civilizations collapsing, economies collapsing, like war, famine, things we really don't want our kids to experience. So I wanted to share a really helpful concept that I've learned from studying Gandhian nonviolence, which is that wherever there is fear, there is power. And that's really part of our work in the transition movement, is moving from fear and grief and paralysis into action. There is a lot that we can do. There are actually infinite alternatives to the way that we're currently managing our economy. So if you can just kind of breathe into what you're feeling and let go of whatever, overwhelm or paralysis. I hope I'm not projecting onto you because we have a lot of work to do. Cool, thank you. I'm going to share some examples, but yeah, there are infinite possibilities. So the examples that I have are by no means comprehensive. Okay, so what do we do about it? Well, we need to learn to consume less and to wean ourselves off of dependence on fossil fuels, not only from a climate standpoint, but just from a standpoint of being independent communities not dependent on the fossil fuel industry. And we need to plan ahead and figure out how to make our communities more resilient and stronger. And that's where transition comes in. So I work for Transition US, which is the national hub for the International Transition Towns movement. Has anyone in here heard of transition towns? Cool, awesome. Transition seeks to reimagine and rebuild our world, and it's a movement of communities coming together all over the planet. I'm going to share just a few examples of what transition looks like in practice. So this first project here is in Sarasota, Florida. It's a gleaning project that takes what would be waste produce from organic farms and redistributes it to food banks and just really anywhere that people need nutritious food. Eggleston Community Orchard is in the Jamaica Plain neighborhood of Boston, Massachusetts, and it was the site of a fatal stabbing incident and has been reclaimed. They did some healing work, but also they planted a community garden, and now it's a gathering space. So it makes the whole neighborhood safer and just feels a lot better than what was there previously. And it provides food. And then this last project is installing a garden at a school in Santa Rosa, California, and that's using the model of work parties, which is something that we in Transition love. If you invite me to a work party, I will most likely be there as long as I can bring my kid. We love work parties, and it's a great place to find love too, actually. So in transition, we believe that if our communities are properly planned and designed, it's actually possible to have a higher quality of life than what we're currently living, while using fewer resources than we currently consume. This project here is part of the Victory Garden Initiative in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but there's a few similar projects around the country, and it's named in the legacy of the wartime mobilizations, victory gardens, when the U.S. government encouraged families to grow as much food as they could. So this project is planted, I think now they do over 500 gardens a year in Milwaukee, they start. And then this other project is something I was a part of in Sebastopol, California, but it's one model from the village building convergence, which is something elsewhere has brought to Paonia. This is called intersection repair, and we're doing a model for how to redesign our intersections so that it's a place where people can actually gather, create community, also slow traffic, make it safer, make it more pedestrian and bike friendly. And this was inspired actually by a child being hit in an intersection. So we realized, we need to redesign our streets and our neighborhoods. Transition is an international movement. It's in over 1,500 communities in over 50 countries around the world. This map is actually not all the transition towns. It's more people who are interested in transition as well as transition towns. That's why there's so many dots on the map, but just to give you a sense of where it is. And it's really growing organically. This is the spirit of transition, I would say, our core values. We strongly believe in the power of local action, as well as the power of having a positive vision for the future, which I think is something we're pretty lacking right now in terms of our dominant society and culture. We really believe in the power of collective creativity, of bringing people together to unleash the collective genius of a place. Rebuilding relationships and a sense of community is vital to local resilience. When disasters strike, the neighborhoods that have the best outcomes are the neighborhoods where people know each other. And we believe in local empowerment. The transition movement is a grassroots, decentralized, bottom-up movement. This slide I always have to share because that's a picture of my sister learning how to double dig a bed on a permaculture farm in California, but I think it captures the essence of transition. It's a really proactive, positive, hands-on movement. So one thing we like to say is transition is hope with its sleeves rolled up. It's not just hope and vision, but it's combined with a lot of practical action. Transition is rooted in permaculture. How many folks in here are familiar with permaculture, have taken a, great, wonderful. So transition came out of a permaculture design course in Ireland, a 2-year course through a community college, and the students came up with a plan to get their whole community off of fossil fuels by applying permaculture principles at the community scale with a heavy emphasis on relocalization. So in permaculture, we work with nature to create resilient systems that can result in a permanent culture as opposed to a disposable culture, which is what I would refer to as our current consumer culture, as well as past agricultural civilizations that have collapsed because they've depleted the resources they depend on, like topsoil, to the point where it couldn't sustain their level of consumption anymore. So we want to shift from having a disposable culture model to a permanent culture. I think you all are probably familiar with the ethics of permaculture: earth care, people care. Fair share seems to be the tricky one. And again, that doesn't mean communism, it means fair. Return of the surplus is another way we talk about fair share, which means excess wealth, if that's generated from a business, that should go back into the community or the earth.
Sounds like communism.
But it's not communism. So permaculture is a study of patterns. We look at the patterns found in nature, and in transition, we look at the patterns of resilient communities. Some of these that I've observed are, this is my own list. It's based on other sources, but it's not a scientific list. These are my observations. Sense of community and connection to place, participatory democracy, so the people participate in government and the government responds to the people. Openness to new thinking and ideas, that's how communities evolve, and diversity is valued. We know nature works in diversity. There's community stewardship of common resources. This could be parks and public lands. It could also be things like water and air. Neighborhoods are designed for people rather than for cars and driving long distances. There are localized food, water, energy, and economic systems, as well as transportation. There are healthy natural ecosystems and regenerative economies. Before I get into regenerative economies, I just want to share its opposite, which is the extractive economy. Extractive economies are where resources are pulled out, pollution or other harmful impacts are left behind for the community to deal with, and wealth is taken out of the community. So we're extracting resources, we're extracting wealth, rather than leaving them in our place. Does anyone know what this is a picture of? So fracking is a great example of an extractive industry, which is particularly challenging to the resilience of our community because of its likelihood or possibility of really seriously damaging our water supply, which we know is the heart of everything we depend on here. So this is where regenerative economics comes into the picture. Oh, first I wanted to embody the Lorax for a moment. I've been reading a lot of children's books. Okay, so reality check. We are at a point ecologically and economically where we really should not be building more fossil fuel infrastructure. If we want to keep fracking out of our community, we should be doing it not as a not in my backyard kind of approach, but as a shifting our economy away from dependence on fossil fuels and modeling what that looks like here. So what I think we need is a compelling regenerative economic development strategy that will provide a clear alternative to the jobs creation argument of fossil fuel extraction. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about. So when we think about creating an economy that's compatible with leaving behind an inhabitable planet for our kids and future generations, shopping green is not enough, because we're at a point where we've depleted the natural resources we depend on to for survival to a point where we actually need to be regenerating them. So instead of managing or controlling our natural resources, let's think about stewarding and caring for our natural resources. That means we need to shift from an anthropocentric or human-centric view of the way we do business to a biocentric or life-centric view of the way we do business. So what would that mean? What would that look like to shift from acting as a consumer to acting as a steward? It's just for you to ponder for a moment. Really, I was getting ready for this. Colorado, in the middle of a dry spell. Minnie Wachoni is a household name. I had to get my art in there. So thanks to water protectors, Minnie Wachoni is a household name. We know water is life is not an exaggeration. And an important aspect of water stewardship is changing the way we relate to water and to our watershed, thinking of it not as a commodity, but rather as the lifeblood of a regenerative bioregional economy. In a time of drought, responsible water stewardship is even more critical, obviously. And a question I recommend asking anyone who supports fracking in our watershed is how they can sincerely guarantee protection of our water supply. My understanding is that is just not possible, and removing hundreds of thousands of gallons of water from the hydrological cycle as fracking wastewater is really a foolish and short-sighted approach. So any economic development strategy for our community should prioritize water stewardship. This could look like farms that utilize practices like polyculture plantings or rotational grazing, mulching, earthworks to build topsoil, and which will more effectively retain water. It could look like ecotourism operations that incentivize restoring our natural ecosystems and enhancing the hydrological cycle, because trees actually create rain. It could be a landscaping company that utilizes or that specializes in water-wise landscapes or creek restoration. This is a vocational training program for ecological landscapers in Northern California. My partner did this program. It was awesome. It could be a company that uses biofiltration to clean water, like this company uses mycoremediation to clean water contaminated from cattle grazing. Does that sound familiar? That's actually for a municipal water district in California. Composting toilets are really going to be important in the future because toilets use a lot of water. And in Northern California, I went through the drought cycle there. I lived there for 4 years, right when it was entering the severe drought period. And like, composting toilets are something that are now really on people's awareness. Okay, so soil stewardship goes hand in hand with water stewardship because soil with higher levels of organic matter and microbial life retains water more effectively, and also building soil sequesters carbon. Again, rotational grazing. This is a no-till farm in California, Singing Frogs Farm, which gets a lot of media coverage because their model is not only very productive and lucrative, it also sequesters a lot of carbon and uses the scarce water resources really effectively. And this is a cooperative composting and recycling business that buys all sorts of waste products from restaurants and other businesses and turns it into compost. Also waste veggie oil for biofuel, lots of good stuff. Food stewardship should be an easy one. We have lots of amazing farms here, and in a strong bioregional economy, we would have enough farms to be feeding the people who live in our region as well as the surrounding areas that aren't well placed to grow their own food. We also need to have control of our seed supply. That is key to having local resilience, is having control over our own locally adapted seed varieties. And that other farm is Growing Power in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, if any of you are familiar with that model. It's a great integrated cold climate model for urban food production. So air and climate stewardship. This is tricky. Renewables have to be done in a good way in order to actually have a regenerative impact on the economy. The production of renewables is still kind of extractive, but if it's a decentralized model that builds community wealth, then that money can at least have a regenerative influence on the local economy, even if it's not biologically regenerative. So small-scale distributed renewables, and we are really lucky here to have some amazing innovators and entrepreneurs and experts in solar cooking, which if we want to say no natural gas, no fracking, then let's model cooking without natural gas. Here. And there are like countless other types of enterprises that are hard to imagine right now because in our current economy it would be hard to generate a profit, but as our climate continues to shift, as the economy continues to shift, the economic incentive will become increasingly clear. For example, planting trees to combat the urban heat island effect that we feel in our concrete, thermal mass, thermal retaining city centers, even right outside this Paradise Theater. So when I have time, I'm going to start a tree nursery particularly aimed at doing that, and y'all are welcome to do it too, because one of the values of a regenerative economy is cooperation over competition. Healthy competition is still good, but we're going to need all the trees we can get, so cooperation. We can also grow medicine, food, fiber, and fuel. This is a picture of my partner's hemp farm out on Blackbridge Road. So do these ideas seem like a stretch from the dominant economy? Seems like you all can imagine it. Great. These are just basic strategies for stewarding the resource of our home, deepening our connection to the place we live, making our community more resilient. Okay, so now I'd like to share a little bit about my work with the Transition Reconomy project. Reconomy refers to rethink, relocalize, but also redesign, regenerative, resilient, real economy is what we're going for. It's an international project. All the permaculture folks will appreciate that. Our intention is to create the conditions for local economic transformation to occur. So we work on cultivating the whole ecosystem, economic ecosystem. What it looks like in practice is bringing together stakeholders to come up with a shared vision for what our economy would look like. That could be local government, chamber of commerce, business leaders, concerned citizens who want to see this type of development in their community. What's happened in some other communities, particularly in the UK, where I would say transition is more advanced in the UK because that's where it originated, are economic assessments to determine the market potential of key resilience building sectors like food, for example, and renewable energy, but also things like home energy retrofits and even the social sector, childcare, elder care, that sort of thing. We nurture the local investment ecosystem through local investing clubs. Slow money is one example, but there are many other ways of doing small-scale local investment, including the local entrepreneur forum. I think there's been something like that done here already called a trout tank, and I know Engage is working on their Spark tank, but it's a forum to raise up local entrepreneurs and find many different ways for community members to support them. So particularly we want to support businesses that will build resilience in our community and help transform existing businesses to a model that will build resilience as well. Some of the criteria or the qualities of resilience building businesses are that they really value localization and strive to be as local as possible, as makes sense. We don't believe that we need to be making all of our own technology, computers, etc. But trade is good, but let's make what we can locally, whatever makes sense. We value appropriate resource use, minimizing waste and pollution, maximizing use of renewables, and respecting resource limits. I think this one is maybe the biggest shift, but businesses serve a purpose greater than profit. Profit is still good. It's needed for businesses to be sustainable, but that's not the whole point. It's not just about profit maximization. It's about meeting real community needs. These businesses are part of the community. They treat and pay their workers fairly. They practice democratic governance, which is the cooperative model, and they build common wealth. They make the community better, more wealthy versus extracting the wealth. And if they meet all these criteria, then they strengthen the resilience of the place. And these are like aspirational criteria. No business really can start doing all these things immediately unless, I guess, they're really well capitalized maybe. But these are things to aspire to. These are the values of the new economy. And then, like, the heart or soul of this new economy is localization. It's a shift from transactional to relational. One example of that I think of a lot in this community, I know a lot of the people where I buy things, where I do my economic activity. So if I happen to forget my wallet, I can give an IOU because they know me and they know that I'll come back and pay for it. So that's an example of relational versus transactional. Reconomy utilizes creativity and encourages people to reach their full human potential versus kind of feeling like a trapped or a slave to a job, which I've definitely felt before. And there are many alternative economies that embody this, like sharing, trade and gift economy, alternative currencies, etc. This picture is the Northeast Seattle Tool Library. It's a sharing library for tools. Over here we have an alternative currency in Brixton, the UK. And this picture, again, I think embodies the relational versus transactional. That's me buying food from my neighbor in an honor system. In order to shift our economy and shift our communities, we also have to shift what's inside of us, the way that we think about our communities and our economy, what we value, away from a focus on material wealth toward connection with people and nature. That doesn't mean giving up all material wealth, but just shifting those things a bit. We do a lot of work around creating a healthy culture. Learning how to work together is not something we're especially good at, especially in a cooperative, non-hierarchical setting. We're used to working in hierarchy. So we have a lot of skills to learn in how to effectively work together. Sorry, I'm having some feedback or background noise maybe from my hair. In order to work effectively together, we have to have a self-awareness of how we're showing up in a group, what we're bringing, how people are reacting to us. We have to learn how to resolve conflicts in a good way, because working together inevitably means conflicts, and that tends to be when things fall apart, but really we can learn to not be afraid of conflicts and to how to navigate them in a good way. And in transition, we really also believe in celebration, because this is hard work. It's going to take a long time, so we need to celebrate our accomplishments along the way. Like I mentioned before, part of this is moving from fear and grief or distraction even into action. And we do a lot of work around visioning. That's something I don't have time to do with you today, but we would go through like kind of a guided process of imagining what our community looks like in a resilient future, and then figuring out what are the steps we need to take to get there. But it really helps to have that visceral, embodied awareness of what that future could be like. It's not just some cerebral concept that is really hard to feel or imagine in practice. This is kind of one of our mantras in transition. If we act alone, it will be too little. If we wait for government to act, and that's really like big government, like federal government, especially in the context of climate change. We wait for government to act, it will be too little, too late. But if we come together as a community, it could be just enough, just in time. This is a quote from Margaret Wheatley. There's no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. And I've really felt that to be true doing this work. It hasn't been easy to be in this job, in this position for the last 5 years, but the rewards from experiencing kind of what's possible, seeing the caliber of people doing this work, believing in this alternative vision for the future have really fed me and kept me nourished, and I feel like I'm in it for the long haul because of that. And Margaret Wheatley is going to be speaking at an online summit that we're doing in October. So if you're interested in learning more about transition, I invite you to participate in that. I might try to host a watch party here. We're also going to have Rob Hopkins, who's the founder of the International Transition Movement, speak. And you'll be hearing from different transition towns across the U.S. I feel like I just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg. I know this is a lot of information, and I'd be happy to talk with you more. I'm local, as long as you're cool with hanging out at the park with me and my son. You can contact me, Marissa, at transitionus.org. Transition US has a good website with a lot of information. We also have trainings. These are 2 online trainings. The launch training is kind of how to start a transition initiative in your community. There's also a cool Think Resilience course coming up with Richard Heinberg from the Post Carbon Institute. If any of you are familiar with his work, he's kind of an expert on the academic side of all of this, especially energy. These are a couple of reports that I've worked on that give more detail to the new economy concepts that I described. This one on the bottom shares 25 examples of businesses that build community resilience, current businesses in the US. And I just wanted to end with this quote from Margaret Wheatley. With so much content to cover, I'm not sure I really captured the essence, the heart of transition, and I think this quote speaks to it. So warriors for the human spirit is what we are. They're awake human beings who have chosen not to flee. They abide. You will know them by their compassionate presence. When asked how they do it, they will tell you about discipline, dedication, and the necessity of community. You can identify them by their cheerfulness. They serve as beacons of an ancient story that tells of the goodness and generosity and creativity of humanity, which is a story we really need right now. Thank you.
Thank you to Marissa. Tony, can you turn this on? We are going to have a short panel with 3 people from our